Resume. Okay. Okay. Oh, you know what I need? I need my thing. Resume. Okay, there we go. So we'll turn this a little off. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So we're live. If you're on YouTube and you post comments, I can see them. And if you're in StarCam, then you have the ability to upload videos and ask your questions. So looks like there's some viewers in. Let's see what we've got. And we will wait until we see some people join. All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I run Sourdough for Beginners. I can see that we've got some viewers here. So live Q&A, you can ask anything you want about sourdough. I can help you. Ask away. Let's see what you've got. So for those of you who are in StarCam, I can see a few of you. Upload your questions and we will talk about sourdough. So I baked some bread today. I was just asking Rick, I can't remember when I mixed the last loaf, but today is Monday and we were very busy all weekend. I think that I might have mixed the loaf on, did we go to the track on Saturday?
Yeah, maybe.
So I might have mixed the loaf on Friday. I had 2 loaves and I put them in my bannetons and put them in the fridge, and then I baked one today and it's beautiful. I'm going to take you to see it. Hang on. I'll walk you in and show you my beautiful blistery cold proof loaf. So when we're teaching the sourdough basics, we follow the essential processes. And what are the essentials? They're just the bare minimum things that you need to be able to make sourdough. Once you master those and you're comfortable with those, then you can start adding sort of more advanced processes. So this loaf was done in a banneton, and I'll show you. I've got one down here in the fridge. One sec. So I've got these silicone bannetons. So here's one. They're just like made of rubber. And here, I'll let you see how this one looks. So it's just dough in the pan. I'm just going to set this down for 1 second. So I mixed these on Friday, and they've been cold proofing, and it's Monday. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, it's day 3. And, the thing is, proofing is something that I consider a optional process, but once you've mastered the bare minimum essentials, we do think that you should add it. So, and I've been doing a ton of experimenting with cold proofing lately because we're so busy, and I'm really loving it. Looks like Carlene's got a question. Let's see what she has to say.
Hi, Sarah. I don't know if you've seen this last week where when you're bulk proofing your dough, they're taking pieces of the dough and putting it in water, and if it floats, it means it's ready. I made bread this weekend, and I tried it. Didn't work. I think you just really need to know your dough and how to bulk proof. I also made some.
So I'm just going to pause, Carlene, here. So the float test. So there is something called the float test, and what it is it's actually usually where you take your starter and see if it floats before you start to mix it to bake. And if it floats, then theoretically it's active enough to bake with, right? And I can see where, a starter is usually ready to bake with when it's full of air and it's risen and it's high. But we've just done so much testing, and we see in the group all the time, people are taking sourdough starter that's old and been in the fridge forever, and they are still finding that it works well. So in general, without getting deep into the science of it, we always say that we don't believe that the float test is reliable. So things trend, especially in something like sourdough where it's so exciting and everyone's into it and they want to know what's going on, right? Like they they start things. Sorry, I just looked at the YouTube comments and saw the comment that my husband just made, and it made me laugh. Stop being ridiculous, Ricky. But so, anyways, Carlene, what I would say is I agree with you. You just have to watch your dough. Like the one thing I can always recommend is when you're first starting out with sourdough, try to time your mixes so that it's a day when you're home. And people always say, "Well, I work a full-time job. Like, how am I going to do this?" And what I'm not saying that you always need to do it that way. What I'm saying is that for the first few loaves, while you're learning, let those be on days when you're there so that you can watch what happens and see where it was at and test and adjust. And then eventually you just get comfortable enough with it. So let's see what the rest of Carlene is saying.
Cheese, sourdough, and they wanted extra cheese. And to me, I felt after it was baked, I should have added a little bit of yeast to it. What are your thoughts?
Let me play that again because I want to get the cheese thing and hear that out. So we're going to hear Carlene talk about the
Hi,
float
Sarah.
test, which
I
we
don't know if
talked
you've
about
seen this
already.
last week where when you're
I
bulk
saw it. I see it all
proofing
the
your
time. Yeah.
dough, they're taking pieces of the dough and putting it in water, and if it floats, it means it's ready. I made bread this weekend, and I tried it. Didn't work. I think you just really need to know your dough and how to bulk proof.
Agreed.
I also made some cheese, um, sourdough, and they wanted extra cheese. And to me, I felt after it was baked, I should have added a little bit of yeast to it. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I think what happens when you add, okay, so just rewinding back 1 second to the float test. All in all, don't do that if you can avoid it. Just watch your dough. See what your dough is doing. Carlene said I just feel like people really need to focus on bulk proofing. The reality is that I'll make a post on the Sourdough for Beginners page, and people will see my scores and see my rise, right? Like I'll show you my bread. You can even see it from this far away, right? It's super risen, right? It's super big. And the only way to get that to happen is to have proper bulk proofing, right? So if you are not following us on YouTube, go find us. It's at Sourdough for Beginners. Find the video called Do This One Thing to Guarantee Bulk Proofing Success. And that's how you're going to get your dough bulk proof perfectly. In regards to cheese, Carlene, I think what happened is depending on when you added your cheese, it I probably contributed to the hydration. So, can you add yeast? Yes. The thing about the yeast is that it's going to make the bread rise really fast. And so you definitely have to be watching it. But I think the reason that your dough, you didn't say specifically, but you did say that you thought you needed to add yeast, which indicates to me that probably your dough didn't rise as much as you wanted it to. And that's probably because the cheese contributed to the hydration of the loaf. So what I would say is wait till the very last second to add the cheese. I know they wanted extra cheese, but Carlene, I'll send you a video. It's on my YouTube page in the short section. It's one of the ones I post all the time in the Facebook group, in those big long list of links that I post in the Facebook group. There's one called mix-ins, and what I say is just add it at the last second before shaping. And you can pile cheese in there. What you do is you stretch your dough out really thin, cover every inch of it with cheese, start folding it, do your pamphlet fold, top down, bottom up, roll it, and at each section add more cheese. So every time you, like when you flip the top down, add cheese there. When you flip the bottom up, add cheese there. After you've started to roll it, add more cheese, right? So you can make a super cheesy loaf without adding the cheese super early in the process. So Bonnie on YouTube just asked, do you ever use fresh milled flour? Do you adjust recipes? So I don't necessarily adjust the recipe very much, Bonnie, except for perhaps more water. So fresh milled flour, anything that's not processed, is known to absorb lots more water. So a couple of things. If you're going to use fresh milled flour, you probably need to be at somewhere between 70 and 75% hydration. The way hydration is calculated is as a percentage of flour. So if you're doing a single loaf and you've got 500 grams of flour, you need to have 70 to 75%. So 350 to 375 grams of water in order to account for how much water that fresh milled flour is going to soak up. And then fresh milled flour is also known to speed up bulk proofing. So it's going to go faster. So you want to really make sure you're keeping an eye on the bulk proofing. So Bonnie, you're on the YouTube channel right now. Find the baking sourdough playlist. In there, there's a 100% whole wheat baking video that will walk you through all the differences that come with like high sturdy high wheat volume. And then also find the bulk proofing success video, same thing that I said to Carlene. If you can master anything in sourdough, master bulk proofing. And the easiest way to do that is to use clear, straight-sided containers and put your dough in as soon as you're done stretching and folding. And then you can see how much it grows, right? You can watch it actually grow and start to estimate how far you need to go. Bonnie says, thank you. You're welcome. I'm really glad you're here. If you have any more questions, definitely ask them.
So I saw a post today of a lady. She posted a reel in our group. I can't remember exactly who, but it was they were talking about wild yeast cultures and making them, and how it was a really essential thing in Japan, and how it ended up. Somebody else in the comments is saying like these wild yeast cultures were really important. Maybe that's something we could look into, like as a wild yeast or something like that.
Well, the reality is that a sourdough starter is a wild yeast compound, right? So all that wild yeast is creating bacteria. So really what sourdough is rotten flour. I mean, don't want to look at it that way, but we take flour and water, we mix them together, we leave them at room temperature, so we allow them to start to really do this sciencey stuff that happens. And by the way, if you're on watching right now, I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in. That's great. We're going to get to all of them. I'm also going to keep an eye on YouTube. We try to focus on the StarCam questions first, but we do always get to the YouTube questions. So I've also seen that reel. So it's a lady on there, and she's talking about her culture in Japan and how everything, or a lot of what they bake with, is with a wild yeast, right? Sourdough starter is wild yeast. When you buy yeast from the grocery store, that's what we call a commercial yeast. So that's created in a controlled environment, but it's technically wild yeast too, right? It's created in a controlled environment and adjusted to create the outcome that people want in bread that rises. So we've talked lots about sourdough starters, we've talked lots about rise and everything else, but the reality is that wild yeast is what a sourdough starter is. There's also lots of different ways to make it. It doesn't just have to be flour and water. Traditional sourdough is flour and water mixed together until they start to rise, which means that we've created the wild yeast, and then used in a very basic recipe. 4 ingredients, right? Water, flour, sourdough starter, which is the wild yeast, and salt. Technically, the only real ingredients are flour and salt, right? Because sourdough starter is flour and water, and then water's water, right? But you can add beer, you can add honey. There's a million different ways you can do it. So it's definitely an interesting thing. So we have a question from
Hey,
Rebecca.
Sarah, Rebecca here. So in the RV, I'm working with some more sourdough. I've gotten
Cool.
comfortable enough with my recipe to start tweaking it, playing around with it, kind of like how we talked about. So I've started messing with hydration just a little bit, and
Yeah.
I've got a question. So in my recipe, the video that I follow, it talks about autolyze. So he calls it autolyze after already adding the starter and the salt, the flour and the water, then
Yes.
letting it sit there for an
Yes.
hour. But from what I understand, that's not autolyze.
Right.
That's just when you do just the flour and the water. Is that correct or incorrect? The
Yeah.
reason I'm asking, it says that it helps with warm temperatures.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so you actually, Rebecca asked a whole bunch of questions in there. So a true traditional autolyze, or autolyse, as people will say it, is flour and water. So you mix the flour and the water together. You let them sit for anywhere from 2 to 10, 12 hours, and let that flour start to break down in the water, right? There's a term in sourdough, we call it fermentolise. And so that's the exact same thing as an autolyse, but it's where you add the starter as well. So what so the most traditional way of making sourdough is this: take your flour and your water, mix them together, let them sit for 2 to 8 hours. Then add your starter. Let that sit for a certain amount of time, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be. Then later add your salt, right? So that scenario where you're doing the starter in, we call that a fermentolyse, right? So what that means is that you're starting active fermentation. Active fermentation in sourdough starts as soon as you add starter to anything, because the starter is the wild culture, it's the wild bacteria, it's what's making it's yeast, right? It's what's making it rise, and rise is what we need. The other thing you said is about the warm temperature. So Rebecca and I know each other. We've talked lots about sourdough. We text every now and again, and we just love it. So she is in Arkansas, which is very warm right now, and she's out in her RV. So they're planning a big trip, and she's trying to get used to baking in the RV. Environment is everything. 1 degree warmer will change how your bread acts. Not only that, the temperature outside of where you are, the not the temperature, the the environment outside where you are. So, for example, we keep our house at a constant 68 degrees all the time, right? But without the house changing, I find that when we traverse from winter to spring and then to summer, my bread changes. You wouldn't think it would, right? Because we're maintaining a solid temperature inside the house. So that Autolyse can definitely help you with your warm bread. And I think what you're doing, Rebecca, is great. Just keep experimenting and keep adjusting those as you go. Let's see what we've got next. Oh, here we go. T.S. Chili, hello. So when you add cheese at every fold, then you put it in the fridge, what will happen overnight? So I generally don't add cheese or anything until right before final shaping. So I don't add it during stretching and folding, but there's two ways you can do it. If you're going to add your inclusions during stretching and folding, you need to account for the liquid, the moisture content, right? So I would consider sugar as a liquid because as soon as you add liquid to it, it liquefies. Cheese, jalapenos, lemon juice, anything that's got a liquid content, if you're going to add them early in the process during stretching and folding, you probably need to reduce your hydration a bit. Number one. Number two, I generally just add them right before final shaping. And when I'm talking about the folding, so I'm talking about shaping folds. So that pamphlet fold that we teach. So you spread your dough out on the counter, you fold the top down, you fold the bottom up, you roll it as you go, right? I tend to add cheese, jalapenos, any wet ingredients at that moment in time, right before final shaping. And if I'm going to cold proof, which is fine, I generally keep the cold proofing short. So when there's inclusions, I generally won't cold proof more than 24 to 36 hours. Whereas if it's just my standard recipe with my regular dough, then I will, I can cold proof up to, like I said, this one that I baked today, I mixed on Friday and it's Monday. I'm baking it today. So if you're going to add inclusions and cold proof, I'd probably shorten that cold proofing just a little bit. All right, let's see what we got.
So I just baked this one right here. It was super easy. I didn't follow any rules. I didn't use an active starter, nothing at all. And it was my first try, actually. So this was my first one I ever did. Pretty easy, lots of air. So I don't know what all the big deal is about.
We see that in the group all the time. We see people posting perfect loaves. And by the way, that loaf that he was holding is by far not perfect. But we see perfect loaves, perfectly staged, and people go, look, it's my first try. And then our admin team ends up looking into them, and we find out that 9 times out of 10, it's a scam. So we do often see great loaves on the first try. So we often see people who come into the group, they really educate themselves, they learn everything, they make fantastic loaves, but they don't necessarily look like the Instagram loaf. And there's still a million things that you can learn. So put it this way, that loaf that he just showed is my loaf. I bake sourdough at least 4 times a week. I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. Like I've been teaching sourdough all this time. There's, I think, 910,000 people in our group, 50,000 followers on Facebook, 10,000 on YouTube. It's just not that easy, but that was funny, Ricky. I liked it.
And so part 2 to that question is about the hydration. So I've got 2 here mixed up with the same way that I've always done everything, except I went up to 70% hydration using King Arthur bread flour. The one previous to that was a little bit lower hydration. So let's see, this guy on top is higher hydration, guy on bottom is lower hydration. I also found that working with the higher hydration, it's feels a lot more pliable. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just doesn't feel as firm.
It'll stretch.
Is that the way that it should be?
Yes. Okay. So the ultimate sourdough is like a baguette, and a baguette is usually almost very close to 100% hydration, 95, 98%, but you need very sturdy flour to make that happen. So the standard sort of all-purpose and bread flour that we can buy at Walmart, in the States you guys have King Arthur. Here in Canada we have Robin Hood and Red Heart. Those are just basic entry-level flours. They've been processed. They've had lots of water go through them during the process. So 75% hydration is a very good hydration level for an everyday baker. With your higher hydration, you should see, Rebecca, with the two that you have, the higher hydration one should likely rise faster. In regards to that more pliable feeling, with a lower hydration, it's much stiffer, right? There's way more flour, way less water. It's not going to stretch as much. And you're starting to find that like sweet spot, right? So you can start to up that hydration. With a bread flour, the maximum hydration you can probably hit is 76 or 78%. With an all-purpose flour, I would never really go over 73%. But yes, the more hydration you add, the more stretchy it is, the more airy bubbles you're going to get. So if you've mastered all of the essential processes and now you're starting to experiment with the things that aren't essential, right? So all that's essential is mixing up, having a strong starter, mixing up your dough, stretching and folding a little bit, bulk proofing for a while, pre-shaping, final shaping, and baking. Everything else, auto leasing, levains or levains, cold proofing, all of those things are optional, but we encourage you to learn those things. So what Rebecca's done is she's slightly increased her hydration. So Rebecca, that should rise a little faster than what you're used to. And if you do it right, it should have lots more bubbles in it, a much more crispier crust, and a more puffy spring to it, if that makes sense. Thanks, Ricky. All right, let's see what we got here. So let's check YouTube. So Bonnie said, thank you for the last one. So, okay, we have a few questions here in YouTube. So, Hildy says, I cannot get on again. I went to bake Wednesday. I have 25 grams active starter from last week in the refrigerator. Can I take out of refrigerator tonight? And can I just add flour and water without discarding? Yes, Hildy. Okay, so yes. So Hildy likes no sour flavor at all in her bread. So what we encourage Hildy to do is a low hydration starter. So lots of flour, lots of water, slow rise. The hungrier your starter is, the faster it rises, the watery it gets, the more sourdough flavor there is. So Hildy, pull your starter out tonight right before bed with your 25 grams. And I assume you're doing the beginner bread recipe, so you need 120 grams of starter. So feed that 25 grams like 90 grams of flour and 70 grams of water, or even go that's the wrong math. So we're looking for 120. So we want half of 120 is 60 and 60. So if you were just doing a regular sourdough, you would do 60 grams of water, 60 grams of flour, but we want Hildy to not have any sour taste. So do like 80 grams of water and 80 grams of flour and 40 grams of water. Rewind all this. Let me start again. Hildy, take your 25 grams of starter out of the fridge and feed it 80 grams of flour and 40 grams of water. Or even 90 grams of flour and 30 grams of water. But that might be hard to stir. So you're good, Hildy. Billy Joe says, big time beginner. My attempts have been too moist and struggling with bulk proofing. Billy, on the sourdough, on the Facebook page right now. Go on to the @Sourdough for Beginners Facebook page. Find the baker's playlist. There's a video there called "Do This One Thing to Guarantee Bulk Proofing Success." You actually just saw it. Rebecca's question a couple minutes ago. She was showing us her dough in clear, straight-sided containers. That's a game changer for bulk proofing. Try to adjust your hydration to about 68 to 70% until you master everything. So in that baker's playlist, the very first video is the beginner bread recipe. It's 68%. And then the second video is the level 2 hydration, which is 70%. So maybe just reduce your water a little bit and really pay attention to that bulk proofing. What ratio should I? Oh, okay. So big time beginner, struggled in my baking, gave up for a bit, and feel my starter is weak. What ratio should I be discarding and feeding? If you think your starter's weak, discard all but say 10 or 20 grams, like empty almost the whole jar, just leave what's in there and give it what we call a flour heavy feed. So do like a 1 to 2 to 1. So 1 starter, 2 flour, 1 water. So that could be 20 grams of starter, 40 grams of flour, and 20 grams of water. Give it a nice heavy flour feed. You're going to find that's going to take the acetone flavor away. It's going to take away the wateriness, and hopefully it's going to help your bread rise quicker. So, Hildy says, I need 140 grams of starter, not 120, need 25 grams left over. Okay, so Hildy has 25 grams of starter in the fridge. Pull your 25 grams out and feed your starter 80 grams of flour and 60 grams of water right before bed, and then mix early tomorrow morning. So that's going to 80 grams of flour and 60 grams of water equals 140 grams. When you take your 140 grams out in the morning, that's going to leave you 25 grams behind. Put that in the fridge. So these are great questions from Hildy. At first, when we first make our starter, we are really following a very rigid schedule, 1 to 1 to 1, or 1 to 2 to 2, or 1 to 5 to 5. And we're doing that the same way every day. Consistency is important when you're creating your starter. But once your starter is established and very, very strong, you can really mess with it. So Hildy, pull out your 25 grams, feed it 80 grams flour, 60 grams water. You should be ready to bake in the morning. All right, let's check on our questions. This was a great one. I can see myself sort of glitching a little. I don't know how great my service is. So if you all don't know, we are in Canada. We are not only in Canada, but we're in the country. We are very far away. I'll show you. It's very hard to see. But way over there on the side of the lake, way past that island that you're looking at, is the closest cell tower. So I never have very good cell service. It's always a little bit choppy, but somehow it's coming through. Our YouTube people are responding immediately and saying thank you. They're getting the answer. And so we're doing it. Hildy, I loved having you here. I loved all of your uploaded questions. I have no idea why you can't get in here. We've got people coming in. We've got viewers. We can see it. I've got to try and help you. So Hildy is a regular on the Sourdough for Beginners Facebook page. We chat all the time. She's just having trouble getting in on StarCam, but luckily she's on YouTube and we can see her. So if there aren't any more questions, I'll give you guys another minute or two to see if there's any more questions. And if not, then we'll wrap up for tonight and I'll go off to my supper and we'll see y'all again next Monday. Let's just check the question queue here. I'll show you guys the lake while we wait for a minute. Nice lights out there. All right. I think we're good to go. Perfect. Okay. All of you, thanks for uploading questions. Thanks for coming. Oh, here we go. One more question. So Heat Ma 2, brand new to sourdough, have been trying for over a week to start my own starter, but we're in massive heat wave with no AC in our home. Is it better to just wait until temp drops? That's a great question. North America is really in a massive heat wave. Rick and I just got back from Texas about a week ago, and believe it or not, the hottest state was Kentucky. When we were driving through Kentucky at about 11 in the morning, it was 104 degrees Celsius. We've got family in Arizona. He was telling us, our cousin in Arizona was telling us it hit 117. Sourdough actually thrives in heat. It might actually be better to start your sourdough starter in a heat environment rather than in a cold environment. In fact, most people only delay if it's like freezing. So I would say no, go to it. Go on the YouTube channel so go on YouTube, type in @Sourdough for Beginners. There's a starter playlist. There's a day by day. It walks you through it. If it's really hot, then just make sure that you're using a tightly sealed lid. to prevent mold, and make sure that you're keeping an eye on it and feeding it regularly. If anything, in a high heat environment, I might just encourage making sure that you're feeding it often. So with a sourdough starter, it says, feed it. Sometimes sourdough starter recipes will say, oh, well, mix flour and water together. You use it for or leave it sit for 2-3 days before you feed it. In a very hot environment, I would not do that. I would make sure that I am feeding the sourdough starter every 24 hours or even sooner. So definitely check out those sourdough starter videos on YouTube. They'll help you with everything you need. And all of the playlists on YouTube are designed so that you start at the top video and then just work your way down. All right, there we go. Let's just check YouTube. I think we're good. If there aren't any more questions, then I'm going to sign off. So thanks all for coming. I really appreciate you, and we'll see you all again soon. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Sourdough for Beginners Facebook page, at Sourdough for Beginners group. Tons of help in there. On YouTube at Sourdough for Beginners. I think on Instagram I might be Sarah Sourdough for Beginners, and on TikTok I'm sourdough.for.beg. But if you really want to learn, YouTube's definitely the place to go. So we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye for now.